There was a time when the only justification for doing something offensive to others was because I like it, or it makes me feel good. Anything more was compromise. It is refreshing to see that 1980s heavy metal is still under attack by the establishment. In the 1970s and 80s, it was an establishment that promoted conservatism and the religious right that attacked heavy metal. Now, the same music, lyrics, and attitude of the 1980s is under attack by the current establishment, which now promotes leftist political correctness, and by the multicultural left. Clearly, if two extremes both oppose something, then this something must be in the middle, meaning it is moderate and logical. It was heavy metal that was the voice of reason, while the supposedly respectable establishment was always on the extreme. In the 1980s, many kids were fans of John McEnroe, who was rude when he was right and even when he was wrong.
Right on the line. No mistakes so far in this match, right? You haven't overruled anything. No mistakes whatsoever.
Second stop, please.
Answer my question! The question, jerk! We're not going to have a point taken away because this guy's an incompetent fool. You know that?
Here's an actual customer out here. What's the best kind of firework to buy?
Wouldn't you like to know, weather boy?
Heavy metal fans had such an attitude, irreverent to conservatism. In the past, heavy metal fans were generally against conservative Christians because they saw them as the powerful establishment who censor, who condemn, who are judgmental, and who claim to have the moral high ground. Now, however, it is the multicultural, politically correct activists, journalists, and politicians who are the powerful establishment, who censor, who condemn, who are judgmental, and who claim to have the moral high ground. Sid Vicious of the Sex Pistols wore a Nazi swastika t-shirt. Metal bands used Satanism. The idea was to upset people. The ideas of not being offensive, not eating red meat, etc. are another form of keeping people in check, obedient, and polite. In the 1980s, heavy metal was offensive to the old Christian traditionalist establishment. Is heavy metal now daring enough to be offensive to the new politically correct establishment? Are heavy metal people still made of steel, or are they now made of clay? Heavy metal was built on the very foundation of "it's my right to offend you." Heavy metal people generally did not say they hate Christian traditionalism. They were just offensive and disrespectful to it. A relatively small part expressed hate. Now the establishment media has tried to put heavy metal into a mold of obedience and submission, along with stand-up comedians, video games, etc. Heavy metal itself can be seen as one example of all modern culture that is under siege and constant attack by the new left, big business, and the establishment media. So why are heavy metal people now not willing to be offensive to the politically correct establishment with provocative covers and songs? For example, ridiculing social justice as comedians ridicule transgenderism, not because they are against or in favor of social justice, but because it is their right to be offensive, disrespectful, and to ridicule others and make them feel bad, especially when they are seen as oppressive, just as they did by ridiculing Christian conservatism when this was seen as oppressive. In the past, they would be accused of being anti-Christian. Now they would be accused of racism against minorities. Why are they now afraid of an accusation? The reasons. The Christian establishment allowed free speech. Conservative traditionalists rarely protested or banned albums or album covers or concerts. With few exceptions, shops supported the artist's freedom to be offensive and sold their albums, and clubs hired them to play concerts. Now the politically correct establishment is more fanatic and less democratic compared to Christian conservatives. They protest, intimidate, or ban anyone who offends them. To understand the difference, simply consider Halloween. In the 1980s, Christians did not tell people not to dress as witches or devils, but politically correct leftists do tell people not to dress as sexy nurses or Arabs because this is racist cultural appropriation, and people need to consult leftist university professors to tell them what is or is not acceptable. This was acceptable in the past, around 1950, when conservatives ruled. Now that the liberal-minded leftists have come to power, this would be unacceptable. The right then did not impose its Christian conservative morals in order to protect the feelings of traditionalists, at least not in all countries and all areas of expression. But now the left does impose its politically correct morals to protect the feelings of ideologues who cannot possibly be harmed by such a poster, for example. The new dark age of censorship has been established by the social justice left. But it is always a danger for society when the establishment can forbid disagreement, even for a good cause. Intimidation and bans, frightening people into submission for a good cause. At the height of the Cold War, McCarthyism had a limited scope and affected mainly the military. Earlier, there were Hollywood purges, but in total, only 12,000 people lost their jobs, compared to 20 million people losing their lives in the Soviet Union. In the United States, the Communist Party always remained legal. Now a heavy metal band would be afraid to be offensive. The benefit, protecting feelings, is far less than the harm, fear, and submission. After all, people are not offended if they do not learn about an offensive song, if the leftist media do not mention it repeatedly, and if the media do not convince them that they should care about something offensive and that they have the right to stop it, unlike the past. In order to pass the 1980s heavy metal test, a leftist today would have to welcome the attack on his most cherished beliefs, welcome racist jokes or sexist comments. They do not have to like them, but certainly have to approve of someone's right to express them. This is the metal mentality, or if one wishes, metality. Confident cultures are not offended by cultural appropriation when they are not encouraged to feel offended. Music dealing with soldiers being hurt by swords and bullets cannot be occupied with people hurt by words. At a time when all the censorship is being carried out by the multicultural, politically correct establishment, from big business to big media and social media, to retain the supposedly free-thinking heavy metal attitude, bands today should not only refuse to follow the dictates of political correctness, but they would even have to choose to criticize the minority activists that the left supports, simply because these are the groups that are not allowed by the media to be criticized, just as they had criticized Christianity earlier for the same reason. But apart from the activists, one must remember that it would be wrong to criticize and victimize the minorities themselves. But it is not wrong to condemn the political activists behind political correctness, the new church. Incidentally, even the activists may be attacked by the leftist multicultural establishment if they dare disagree with a dogma. Taking the word conservative not in the political sense, but in the sense of being narrow-minded and unwilling to consider other points of view, the worst thing people claiming to be free and open-minded can come up with is conservatism. If one tolerates all points of view and wishes to offend all points of view, including his own, then accepting some views as sacred beyond criticism is a compromise that destroys the very foundation of open-mindedness. Should metal apologize and feel guilty for being offensive? The closest we have come to this is with President Trump, with his attacks on other political figures and mostly on journalists. A 1980s heavy metal fan may have approved or disapproved of President Trump's policies, but he would not disapprove of his insulting manners, calling his opponents clowns or stupid. They would not have demanded propriety and politeness. The media may see these statements as racist, as it may see heavy metal as racist. However, these statements are merely insensitive, in keeping with his insensitive statements on every issue he ever talks about. Incidentally, the people who consider ridiculing journalists to constitute racism are the same group of people who claimed long hair and loud music turns children to psychopaths. Trump is mentioned precisely because he was vulgar and annoying to journalists, academics, other politicians, and activists against free speech, as well as the average citizen who wanted propriety. Suffice it to say that journalists who wanted a return to normalcy and politics as usual were asking for the political equivalent of soft jazz, referring to Trump as heavy metal, that which is inappropriate, disagreeable, and not mainstream. Heavy metal supporting Black Lives Matter would be like heavy metal supporting the church in the 1980s. The establishment, media, and schools support Black Lives Matter to the same degree they supported Christianity decades ago. But heavy metal does not support the establishment or what the establishment promotes. But what if someone actually does support Black Lives Matter? Well, many supported Christianity or patriotism or one political party or another in the 1980s, but they did not promote their beliefs. Only if they happened to be asked in an interview, then perhaps they would speak a little about their beliefs. Many promoted a Christian or patriotic or anti-Christian view, but they did not promote actual political organizations or views on specific policies to influence their fans. They did not advertise "Sinners Repent" or "Support our troops" or "Join Anton LaVey's Church of Satan." Even if one considers support for anti-racism as normal as saying "be a good parent and take care of your children" or "be a good student and love your parents," it is still a fact that such encouragement is preaching. It is an agreement with the established view, and it is so obvious that promoting it is insulting to the intelligence of the fans. This may not be right or smart, but it is the metal way, and it proved to be beneficial in some ways. By not obeying immediately, but keeping an open mind, one is slow to accept the right things one is told, but also resists believing the wrong things he is told. As a matter of fact, there were no pop songs or Hollywood movies about the importance of being a good parent or being a good student or staying away from drugs. If anything, Hollywood glorifies drugs and gang violence and the lifestyle of drug dealers. Multicultural dogmatic views are the only values this establishment promotes. Of course, having a song or two about the evils of racism would make sense, but actually advertising something that shows you're obedient to the established view, scoring brownie points to earn praise, means making yourself subservient to the establishment. It is not revolution, it is obedience, passionate obedience. We cannot simply enjoy the music we like with the lyrics we like, and anyone who does not like it can simply listen to something else, like Christians go to churches, Muslims go to mosques, football fans go to stadiums, and gamers play computer games. No, this music must be analyzed and changed so it will be more inclusive and diverse, and everyone can enjoy it more easily. What about taking horror out of horror films? Or porn out of pornography, so children can also watch these films? Not everything is made for everyone. Literature or classical music are not for everyone. We cannot turn a literature book into a comic book so that everyone can enjoy it, even the lowest common denominator. After all, When people do not like something, it is not because this something is not inclusive, but because they are not inclusive. They refuse to listen to music that is not politically correct, or refuse to watch foreign films with subtitles. Imagine being forced to create art that everyone will like. Of course, no one has suggested that pop music change and include lyrics about heroic fantasy, dragons, and war, so it will be more inclusive, and heavy metal fans will not feel excluded. And what about romantic films, inserting some science fiction, so science fiction fans will not feel excluded? The demands that heavy metal be inclusive do not mean that metal must accept different people, because heavy metal has always been inclusive. The demand is that heavy metal change so people who do not like it now will like it. It is like what the PMRC was doing in the 1980s. Metal must change and become something that religious conservatives will approve of. It is like someone going to a place where children are playing football or soccer, but when he asks for inclusiveness, he does not mean that he wants the other children to let him play their sport together. Instead, he demands that they now play basketball, because this is what it means to be inclusive. They must change and do what he likes. These are the kind of people that accuse even classical music of being racist. If anyone believes Beethoven was a great composer, he is racist. In order to make classical music inclusive, we must believe Beethoven was not a great composer. Supposedly, only this way can academic classical music institutions stop suffering from whiteness and systemic racism. If an old classical composer had racist views in accordance with the prevailing beliefs of his time, even if his music is instrumental, the music itself is racist. It displays inequality of tones. The 60s, or especially the later heavy metal mentality, was never apologize for anything. Never apologize for what you are. You have the right to live and dress any way you like. You have the right to say anything you like and offend anyone you like. You can offend conservatives and Christians. By extension, you may also choose to offend Muslims, as well as women, gays, or any minorities. The reason they did not choose to offend minorities was that minorities were seen as the good guys, who were weak and good, while offense was reserved for the powerful and bad. The very idea of the multicultural dogma, which is white people, and especially white heterosexual men, must always apologize for everything, is the exact opposite of the 60s or heavy metal mentality, especially if we consider that most heavy metal musicians and fans were white heterosexual men. The idea that politicians must apologize for a seemingly racist joke or sexist comment they made 30 years ago, and which the media and activists discovered recently, is the exact opposite mentality. Only Trump has expressed the 60s or heavy metal mentality clearly. No matter how he behaved or spoke, he did not apologize. Sleeping with women whom he saw as sex objects, being vulgar in his personal life. It does not matter if we agree or not with his actions or words. As long as you have sex, but do not rape, offend, but do not harm, and many would say even take drugs, but not sell them to children, you have nothing to apologize for. The right to offend is basic. This is the real difference. Multiculturalists say not being offended is a human right. People believing in freedom say being able to offend is a human right. Heavy metal musicians displayed satanic imagery, Nazi paraphernalia, men had a masculine or threatening image, or a tough street image, or instead had female hairstyles, or women appeared fully liberated and independent. Mostly, the intention was not to promote Satanism, Nazism, violence, nor homosexuality or transgenderism or respect for women. There was no message, neither good, such as respect for women and gays, nor bad, such as Satanism, Nazism, and violence. There was no political correctness. Do not offend gays, or do not stare at women's bodies because that is a rape stare, or pornography is sexist and offensive. Women were fully liberated and independent, but still presented themselves as sex objects. because the intention was to draw pleasure from life, not to preach. There was no talk about and no lyrics about gender equality or racial equality or sexual orientation equality. People lived their lives and saw each other as equal. Women, gays, and if there were a few blacks, were never discriminated against, nor were they given special privileges to be protected from offense. It was a post-racist society. No one was excluded. If there were fewer women, it was their choice. If there were almost no blacks, it was their choice. It was not like now, with complaints that there are not enough women in science, not enough blacks in ice hockey, lesbians are more obese, and this may prove they are underprivileged. There are not enough people of color in historical movies about ancient and medieval Europe where almost everyone was white. Motorhead used Nazi paraphernalia not to show Nazi sympathies, but simply to imply we have the right to do as we like, and we have the right to offend you. But if they had done this today, in the age of political correctness, if some story in the media or some leftist activist groups demanded that Motorhead concerts or records be banned because these symbols are offensive to people of color, minorities, it is likely that this band would be banned, just as states and businesses have banned other symbols like the Confederate Army flag or television series. Also, they could still display their nationality. They did not consider themselves to be a separate identity group, a splinter identity group that has broken off from the rest of the nation and who feel offended and at odds against their entire society. They did not feel the flag marginalizes minorities or is Islamophobic. And when heavy metal was accused, the musicians did not apologize or become less offensive, but neither did they proclaim to feel offended and threatened, and that conservative Christians do not have the right to criticize them because these Christians are committing hate speech and putting underprivileged and marginalized heavy metal musicians at risk of ridicule or attack. They did not protest against heavy metalophobia. They could take it like a man, and this included the women. The women did not feel offended by gendered language, mankind, manhole, man the ship. They did not demand that the state protect them and ban offensive comments about them, or demand that the police go to people's homes and arrest people because they posted their offensive opinion on the internet, meaning what is happening in the United Kingdom today. It was a time when men were men, in essence, and considered offending and being offended normal, in contrast to today's society full of self-proclaimed victim groups. It was a time when you could take it like a man. It is true that most of the musicians, being white heterosexual men, could not easily see themselves as a victim group, but the women and gays did not either, and they did not present themselves as woke, illuminated social justice activists who were so smart that they can lecture society, preach like a priest burning with fervor, although one with fewer clothes on, and who offer their services to the establishment, to the super-rich elite that owns the media and promotes this multicultural, politically correct culture, or, being offended, demanding restrictions to free speech. Then it was do as you like. Now it is do as you are told. Your opinions, jokes, even mentioning the truth, a cold fact, is first to be cleared with the media. First, you have to ask for permission to express yourself from the media, meaning the people who own the media, who are incidentally the same people who fund the activists who want restrictions to free speech to prevent offensive opinions. Some people enjoy having fun. Others enjoy ruining other people's fun. The most metal attitude of all would be to oppose politically correct censorship and oppression. As the establishment now has imposed a no-offensiveness dogma against minorities, rebelliousness would mean being offensive primarily towards minorities, not in order to disrespect them, but in order to disrespect their supposed protector, the establishment. But this entails hurting innocent people and doing things that are ugly, hurtful, dangerous, and divisive, and this was never a part of this music scene. Thus, the only way to preserve the element of defiance would be to simply disrespect the employees of the establishment, mainly journalists, teachers, and politicians, and this fits in very well with the heavy metal tradition. As these are the professions that are the prime supporters of politically correct censorship and restrictions to free speech, they have earned this distinction. As long as there is no racist intention, insensitivity is anything but a problem. There can be no freedom without the inalienable right to be insensitive. Consider Groucho Marx.
And you can say it was a real love match. We married for money. Am I shrinking, Violet? Say, it wouldn't hurt you to shrink 30 or 40 pounds.
Oh, you impudent.
I can see you right now in the kitchen, bending over a hot stove. But I can't see the stove. Is it true you're getting a divorce as soon as your husband recovers his eyesight?
This lady is my wife. You should be ashamed.
If this lady is your wife, you should be ashamed. Remember, you're fighting for this woman's honor, which is probably more than she ever did.
Why, I've never been so insulted in my life.
Well, it's early yet.
Should heavy metal be more censored, more restricted, and more proper than people were in the 1930s? The argument that metal should change because now the situation is worse would be valid if this were the truth, if the situation really were worse now, but it is not. But what about the protests? Well, is there more racism now? No, but there are more protests. This refers to specific people, journalists and activists, and the people who were convinced by them to protest, to follow. Thus, the real argument is metal should change because some people, journalists, activists, etc., perceive and claim the situation is worse. This is not a convincing argument, because metal is not about caring about other people's perceptions, but the opposite, disregarding their perceptions and feelings, intentionally being insensitive and offensive. But these people are protesting for a good cause, and it is not nice to disregard them, or even worse, to offend them. But this is the spirit of metal. Christians and conservatives supported their beliefs for a good cause, and it was not nice to disregard them, and even worse to offend them, but metal did just that. Metal is not towing the line. Metal is giving the middle finger to everyone on the right and the left, to majorities and minorities. It is not obeying one side, but dumping this side along with all other sides in the same basket, and giving it the finger. Incidentally, if one side, in this case the social justice left, happens to become more powerful in the media, education, and political establishment, this does not mean it must be respected more, but that it is more deserving of the middle finger. Does metal have the right to offend Islam? Does Charlie Hebdo have the right to offend Islam? Should metal bands ridicule Islam or condemn racism? Bands should be able to do anything they wish, do both, or neither, or one or the other. The issue is that musicians should not be forced to do one or the other, and preferably they will not focus too much on any such issue, as political catechism is not the focus of this music. Being inclusive means accepting offensiveness. People who demand no offensiveness are those who are not inclusive, who invent reasons to exclude other people. If an older metal fan spoke to a metal fan of the newer variety, it would not feel like he was talking to another metal fan, as it would in the past, but like he was talking to a pop music fan. Pop music fans could not understand the interests or subject matter in metal songs, but only cared about what the media promoted, having a good time. Likewise now, pop, or perhaps the new kind of metal fans, also only care about what the media promotes. This time it's discussing racism, sexism, and homophobia, and always describing the present situation as it is considered to be from only one point of view. To understand the root of the issue, one must consider the very beginning of the matter. What is heavy metal? What it is to the people who wish to preserve its free spirit, and what it is to those who wish to change it and incorporate it into the modern dogma imposed by the establishment. For the first, heavy metal is what it was in the 1980s or 70s, and also a relatively small part of what followed after the 80s, most of what followed being considered to be on the periphery of true metal. These people could be considered metal purists, or metal elitists, or metal supremacists. Characterizations with favorable or negative connotations may abound. For the others, heavy metal is what is primarily called metal now, and over the last 30 years, and also, nearly incidentally, what there was in the 1980s. It is like Star Wars. For some fans, it is what George Lucas crafted. Everything else is simply a pleasant pastime that is inspired by the true Star Wars, and often it is not so pleasant. For others, Star Wars is the Disney movies, the video games, books, and comic books, and, oh yeah, those old movies George Lucas made. Here, too, it would appear that it is the media that is promoting the second view, and doing so against the wishes of the majority of the fans. The issue remains unsettled as long as the original bands still exist. But when they are no longer present, and after 20 years, if metal is still somewhat popular, what will people think of it? That it was primarily what it was in the 1980s, and the rest is different peripheral music styles and political perceptions? Or that its core is these more modern or recent musical styles and political perceptions, and that the 1980s were a mere introduction? With regard to the musical part, it may all be a matter of semantics and terminology. We could simply refer to original metal and metal evolution. But with regard to political obedience, the multiculturalists are not willing to let any part out of their grasp in peace. Of course, every community is a result of two things: the community it came from in the past and its present surroundings. Thus, the metal community today is partly descended from the metal community of the 1980s and partly the result of modern-day mindsets and pressures. So, the metal community of the 1980s exhibited more freedom because the 1980s afforded more freedom of expression, although the metal community was even more open-minded than its surroundings. Now, the metal community, being composed of people who are heavily influenced by the media and education system that pushes the dogma of a dominant ideological minority, has inevitably become less free. A social justice warrior called for the cancellation of a band because some of their jokes from 40 years ago may offend some people today.
On this episode, we're going to be covering Metallica. This band is ancient, and starting off with a bang, there is their anti-Semitism. First, there's this picture of Hetfield and Ulrich doing a Nazi salute, right here, who is obviously very proud to be wearing a Confederate flag. And then a video of one of their former members doing a Nazi salute and march. Then there's his racism against East Asian people, and his use of the O word. You don't know Kung Fu! Then there was this statement that he was praised for speaking out against racism, even though at the beginning of it they talk about how they don't care who you voted for, as if Trump supporters weren't supporting racist policies.
If someone has an opinion and is a racist or a Stalinist and keeps his ugly opinion to himself and does not make it public, it is a private affair, as he does not display it as a political act, then no matter what he believes, people can accept this person as a professional musician or as a friend, despite rejecting his opinion, as it is his right to believe anything he likes. If after 40 years we notice that every 10 years or so there appears some clue that he may be racist, this does not count. If he chooses to express his opinion publicly but politely, then we may choose to judge him, but can still listen to his music despite our disagreement, just as people may watch an actor's movies despite disagreeing with his political views. If he chooses to express his opinion publicly in a form of extremist hate, such as, I hate right-wingers, or I hate leftists, or I hate blacks, or I hate whites, then we may choose to dislike him, but it is each person's right to possibly still listen to his music. At first, the accusation seems noteworthy. He belongs to the minority of people who are racist, or the tiny minority who are Nazi sympathizers. But then the social justice warrior implies that the band may be Republicans, meaning they belong to the 50% of voters who are Republicans. But actually, she accuses the band of simply accepting people no matter who they vote for, meaning that they are either Republicans or accept Republican voters, meaning they are either among the 50% or among all the moderates or apolitical people who do not vote, or among the Democratic voters, possibly among the majority of Democratic voters who also accept Republican people as friends, meaning well over 80% of Americans. Meaning her accusation is not he is racist or he belongs to the 5 or 10% who are racist, but he belongs to the 80%. This is ridiculous. The real problem is not the jokes. The problem is the offended. These may be offensive to those who suffered at concentration camps or were victimized by criminals or drunk drivers, or may be offensive to the loved ones of those who suffered. We may sympathize with them, but cannot limit our lives and cancel movies with guns and car chases because they make some people uncomfortable, just as we cannot cancel guns or cars themselves. But the complainers are not even concentration camp survivors, but youngsters who wish to draw pleasure from believing they are better than others. In society, there are different niches: Christians, Muslims, blacks, white, typical youngsters, social justice warrior youngsters, metal, old conservative, etc., with different moral codes. Because one band's song appeared on a popular television series, people from one niche, social justice warriors, learned about it, and these people from this niche tried to impose their views on another niche, metal. This would be like social conservatives telling a rap band to be conservative. The idea is that all the original real people in an area do not count, and only the new, younger people, those obsessed with their blind obedience to the newest ideological fashions promoted by the media, are the real ones. So, supposedly, Bakunin was not a real anarchist. He was too old-fashioned, sexist, and patriotic. Instead, it is these young, spoiled brats who are the real anarchists. Active people on the left who have devoted their lives to fighting for what they believe in are not the real leftists. Instead, they should be cancelled because they disagree with the newest fashion. They disagree with making children transgender when they are 3 years old, and they believe in free speech for everyone, including those who disagree with them. Instead, it is these young, spoiled brats who are the real leftists. People listening to heavy metal for nearly 50 years are not the real metalheads. It is these young, spoiled brats who are the real metalheads. At a time when adults were more likely to put a brat in his proper place, at a time in Italy when the fascists and communists were fighting each other, a 10-year-old child who has become a communist with the fervor of the newly converted finds a rifle and holds the owner of the farm prisoner to deliver him to the guerrillas. When the adults from a government of national unity come...
Hey, boy, didn't you hear the orders?
No! Give it back to me! It's my gun! Give it back! It's mine! It's mine!
Another Italian director, Pasolini, was a near-anarchist, communist, atheist, homosexual. He often criticized the police justifiably and was constantly harassed by prosecutors and the police. When asked about the clashes between leftist university students and the police over demonstrations concerning things the students considered important, he stated that he prefers the police because they come from poorer families and this was the best job opportunity they could find, while the students come from richer families, and that is why they have the luxury to be at university instead of working, and their protest is merely for personal pleasure. Workers can be revolutionaries, but privileged university students cannot be revolutionaries. Their so-called revolution is carried out either with the complacence of the establishment, or, as can be seen nowadays, with the encouragement of the establishment. Spoilt brats are not rebels. if egomaniacs seeking pleasure actually do manage to change society, they can only change it for the worse, and only in accordance with the wishes of the establishment. For example, if someone today wants to tell a joke or mention a fact that will be seen as sexist, they may tell the joke only to their closest friends in private and not post it on social media in order to avoid being accused of sexism. However, someone who is more influenced by the modern mentality promoted today may choose not to tell the joke or fact at all, and may even condemn any person who does tell it. Being inclusive means accepting offensiveness. Inclusive people are those who accept all other people, people who crack crude jokes that are offensive to them or hold opinions that are offensive to them. People who demand no offensiveness are those who are not inclusive. They are the ones who invent reasons to exclude other people. Why not to be friends with other people? Perhaps for older generations it is more obvious. Metal is not being obedient to an authority. It is being distrusting of the media and any authority. The decision to be or not to be obedient to the politically correct social justice dogma imposed by the establishment comes down to distrust for the establishment versus trusting the establishment. This is for pop music fans. Metal is meant to be uncensored, and above all, sexual, sacrilegious, and fantastic. Mental health. Kids listening to heavy metal grew up mentally healthier, more stable and happier, perhaps not because metal offered them something, but because it protected them from something. They did not need to follow fashion, trends, and identify with the things that make you mentally sick. As after the year 2000, it became a trend pushed by the media and the education system that people must feel depressed or upset over Trump, racism, etc., and must identify as any number of victim groups, blacks, women, gays, etc. If one identified as a fan of metal, there was no need to identify as a victim. Youngsters want something to believe in, thus they may be sucked up in religious cults or political cults, such as political correctness. But heavy metal protected its fans. They already had something to believe in, metal, so they did not need a cult, a gang, or a fanatic religion. Was it silly to believe in metal? This is debatable, but it was certainly far more savory than to believe in these things. It has been said that heavy metal functions as a form of catharsis. It channels energy, including the propensity to violence, through music, so there is no need for actual violence through other channels, which provide excuses for violence, political, religious, sexual violence, or the pleasure of hating others on political, religious, or other grounds. This is the opposite of what is seen now. For example, one year it's okay to disagree with gay marriage, as did the majority of Democrats. The next year, if you disagreed, you were Hitler, but you could still disagree with transgender bathrooms. The next year, however, this meant you were Hitler as well, but you could still disagree with transgender school showers. The next year, however, this meant you were Hitler as well, but you could still claim a man cannot be a mother. The next year, however, this meant you were Hitler as well. The point is not who is right, but refraining from being absolute and hating others. This is not humanitarianism and fury over disadvantaged minorities. It is a desire to find an excuse to be fanatic, believe you are better than others, and have an excuse to hate people. Metal fans in the past were neither suckered, duped into this, nor did they choose to derive pleasure from such things. Perhaps the difference is largely due to the goings-on in the West after 2015 roughly, when the establishment, politicians, big companies, the media and social media, and schools and universities tried continuously to make many people, especially minorities, blacks, gays, people of immigrant background, and women, believe they are disadvantaged and that they should hate their society, their country, and their friends and family if they disagree with them on political or social issues. If they do not follow and refuse to feel disadvantaged, then they run the risk of the media, education system, strangers on social media, and their own friends punishing them by inflicting upon them the worst pain imaginable to many people today, accusing them of being unfashionable. This accusation, however, is not painful to a heavy metal fan because he was never fashionable to begin with. If journalists, teachers, activists, and so-called friends accuse him of disobeying the establishment and being unfashionable, and accuse and shame him, then the heavy metal fan will deliver the same answer now as he would have in the 1980s.
Metal up your ass!